The crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the marble floor, but Thomas Kane saw only shadows. His hands trembled slightly as he balanced the silver tray, each delicate canopy arranged like a work of art he couldn't afford to drop. The ballroom buzzed with the kind of wealth that didn't just open doors, it built them. And here he was, a ghost in a cheap polyester vest, serving people who spent more on watches than he made in a year. But it wasn't the champagne-soaked laughter or the designer gowns that made his pulse hammer against his ribs. It was the man in the corner, the one with the camera hanging loose around his neck, the one whose eyes never blinked, never followed the action on stage, but remained fixed, cold and calculating, on one person. Sophia Reinhardt. She stood near the front, a vision of controlled power in her tailored midnight blue suit, accepting congratulations from a circle of admirers who leaned in like planets orbiting a sun. Thomas had seen men like the photographer before, back when he had a different life, a life with a badge and a gun and a family that wasn't shattered by tragedy. He knew the stance, the way the man's weight was distributed on the balls of his feet, ready to move. He knew the slight bulge under the photographer's blazer wasn't extra camera equipment. Every instinct Thomas had spent 5 years trying to bury suddenly screamed to life, a siren in his blood that made his vision sharpen and his breathing slow. He glanced at the stage where a television personality with teeth too white and a smile too bright was building up to the evening's main event, the Industry Innovator Award, and Sophia Reinhardt was about to walk directly into a kill zone. The applause started, a wave of sound that felt like it was pushing him underwater. Sophia moved with the grace of someone who had never known fear, her heels clicking a steady rhythm toward the stage, toward the spotlight, toward the invisible crosshairs only Thomas could see. His mind raced through possibilities like shuffling cards, each one ending in blood. He could shout, but the assassin would react faster than security could process the threat. He could try to reach one of the guards stationed along the walls, but they were scanning the crowd for obvious dangers, not wolves and press credentials. By the time anyone believed him, Sophia would be dead, and the man would vanish into the chaos like smoke. Thomas felt the weight of his daughter's medical bills in his pocket, the crumpled notices from the hospital that he'd shoved in there this morning, the ones that used words like urgent and final notice and treatment suspension. Emma. God, Emma. She was 7 years old and her lungs were drowning her from the inside. And this job, this humiliating, soul-crushing job, was the only thing keeping her alive. If he did what his gut was screaming at him to do, he'd lose everything. He'd be arrested, blacklisted, maybe even sued. He'd watched his ex-wife walk away 2 years ago when the medical debt became too much, when the life they'd built collapsed under the weight of a diagnosis that had no cure and a price tag that had no limit. Emma only had him now, and if he threw that away, she'd have no one. But then Sophia turned her head, just slightly, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes met his. She didn't know him. She'd never know him. But in that moment, Thomas saw something in her face that reminded him of why he'd become a cop in the first place, why he believed, once upon a time, that some things were worth protecting. He saw someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who was about to die because evil men made evil plans, and good people looked away. The photographer shifted his weight, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. Thomas didn't think. He grabbed the ornate silver coffee pot from the service station beside him, its contents still steaming, hot enough to scald. His other hand snatched a bowl of dark chocolate sauce meant for the dessert course. He took 3 steps forward, his heart a war drum in his chest, and then he did the most reckless thing he'd ever done. He stumbled, hard and convincing, right into Sophia Reinhardt's path. The tray went flying, appetizers scattering like shrapnel across the polished floor. The coffee pot tipped, and a scalding black wave erupted across her pristine suit, the liquid hitting fabric with a sound like a hiss of betrayal. The chocolate sauce followed, a thick, dark explosion that splattered across her shoulder, down her arm, across her chest. The room inhaled as one, a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen out of the air. Sophia cried out, stumbling backward, her face a mask of shock and fury. Her security team moved like striking snakes, hands on Thomas before he could even process what he'd done, slamming him against a marble column with enough force to crack his ribs. The pain was distant, unimportant. Thomas kept his eyes locked across the room, and he saw it. The photographer had frozen, his hand still inside his jacket, his face a stone mask of frustration. The moment was gone. The shot was impossible now. Security was swarming, guests were shouting, and Sophia was being pulled back, surrounded by a wall of bodies. The assassin's jaw clenched once, twice, and then he smoothly withdrew his empty hand, adjusted his camera, and began moving toward the exit with the calm of a man who had all the time in the world. Thomas felt hands twisting his arms behind his back, felt the cold bite of zip ties around his wrists. Someone was shouting in his ear, demanding answers, threatening consequences he couldn't begin to calculate. But his eyes found Sophia's through the chaos, and he saw her staring at him, not with the rage he expected, but with something else. Confusion, calculation, a question forming behind those sharp, intelligent eyes. He opened his mouth, trying to force words past the hands shoving him toward the service exit, trying to make her understand. But before he could speak, the world tilted, and he was dragged backward through a door that slammed shut like a coffin lid, separating him from the woman he'd just saved and the life he'd just destroyed. The last thing he heard was his daughter's name, a whisper on his own lips, a prayer to a god he'd stopped believing in, and then there was only the fluorescent-lit hallway and the certainty that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The security office smelled like burnt coffee and bleach, a windowless concrete box buried somewhere in the bowels of the hotel where people like Thomas weren't supposed to exist. They'd zip-tied his wrists to a metal chair bolted to the floor, and for the last 40 minutes, he'd been staring at his own reflection in the two-way mirror, watching a stranger with hollow eyes and 3 days of stubble stare back. His phone had been confiscated, which meant Emma's night nurse couldn't reach him, which meant his daughter was probably awake right now, confused and scared, her small chest working too hard for air that wouldn't come. The thought made his hands shake against the plastic restraints. The door opened with a metallic click, and 2 men entered. The first was one of Sophia's security guards, a wall of muscle in a suit that cost more than Thomas's car, his face a professional blank. The second man was different. He moved like water, silent and deliberate, his gray eyes taking in every detail of the room, of Thomas, cataloging and analyzing with the precision of a machine. His suit was understated, expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself, and when he pulled out the chair across from Thomas and sat down, folding his hands on the table, Thomas recognized the stillness of a predator. "My name is Marcus Holt," the man said, his accent hard to place, European maybe, refined. "I'm head of security for Reinhardt Industries. You ruined a very important evening for my employer, and you're going to tell me why." Thomas met his gaze and said nothing. Every cop instinct he had left told him to keep his mouth shut, to lawyer up, to protect himself. But then Marcus did something unexpected. He nodded to the guard, who stepped forward and cut the zip ties with a quick snap of a knife. Thomas rubbed his wrists, confused, wary. "You're not calling the police?" Marcus leaned back, studying him with those calculating gray eyes. "Not yet. See, I've been doing this job for 15 years, Mr. Kane. Yes, I know your name. I know you were a decorated police detective before your daughter got sick. I know you lost your house, your marriage, your career. I know you're drowning in medical debt and working 3 jobs to keep a 7-year-old alive." The words hit like body blows, each one more invasive than the last. Thomas felt his jaw tighten, felt the rage and shame that had become his constant companions bubble up in his throat. "Then you know I can't afford a lawsuit, so why don't you just have me arrested and get it over with?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, a gesture that reminded Thomas of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. "Because you didn't spill that coffee by accident. Your movement was deliberate, calculated, and in the 3 seconds before you moved, your eyes were locked on someone in the press section. Row 4, 3rd position from the left." Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower, more intense. "I saw you mouth something as my men dragged you out. You said photographer. Now, I've reviewed the security footage from 6 different angles, and there's a man matching that position who left the venue exactly 47 seconds after the incident. He didn't stop to ask questions, didn't check on the commotion, didn't do what any normal press photographer would do. He just left, calmly, efficiently, like a man whose plans had just been interrupted." The silence in the room was suffocating. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of a decision that could cost him everything pressing down on his chest. Marcus leaned forward, his hands still folded, his voice barely above a whisper. "So, I'm going to ask you one more time, and your answer will determine whether you walk out of here or spend the next 10 years in prison for assault. What did you see?" Thomas closed his eyes, saw Emma's face, saw the oxygen tube taped to her small nose, saw the fear in her eyes every time she couldn't catch her breath. He saw the hospital bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the eviction notice, the empty refrigerator. He saw the life he'd been clinging to with bleeding fingers, and he knew that telling the truth meant watching it all slip away. But he also saw Sophia Reinhardt's face, saw the question in her eyes, saw a woman who'd been seconds from death and didn't even know it. When he opened his eyes again, Marcus was still waiting, patient as stone. "I saw a killer," Thomas said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. "I saw the way he positioned himself, the way he never looked at his camera, only at her. I saw his hand move toward his jacket the moment she started walking toward the stage, and I knew if I didn't do something, she'd be dead before she took 5 steps." Marcus didn't move, didn't blink, but something shifted in his expression, a crack in the professional mask. "You're ex-law enforcement. You know what you're claiming. Do you understand the implications?" Thomas let out a bitter laugh that had no humor in it. "I understand I just destroyed my life to save someone who doesn't know I exist. I understand my daughter is probably terrified right now wondering where I am. I understand that even if you believe me, I'm still probably going to lose my job, my apartment, and any chance of paying for her treatment. So yeah, I understand the implications just fine." Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against concrete, and for a moment Thomas thought it was over, thought the handcuffs were coming and this time they wouldn't come off. But instead, Marcus pulled out his phone, tapped something on the screen, and turned it around. The image showed a man in his 50s, lean and cold-eyed, with the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. "Is this him?" Thomas stared at the photo, felt recognition slam into him like a fist. "Yes, that's him. Who is he?" Marcus's expression went dark, dangerous. "His name is Vincent Shaw. Former military, former intelligence, current ghost. He's been linked to 6 high-profile assassinations in the last 3 years, but nothing that stuck. If he was here tonight, if he was targeting Ms. Reinhardt, then we have a much bigger problem than a ruined suit." He pocketed the phone and looked at Thomas with something that might have been respect. "You just saved her life. But now someone very powerful wants her dead, and they're going to try again. I need to know everything you saw, every detail, no matter how small." Thomas opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the door burst open and Sophia Reinhardt herself strode in, still wearing the coffee-stained suit, her face a storm of fury and questions. Her eyes locked onto Thomas, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I want to hear it from him," she said, her voice ice and steel. "I want to know why a waiter just destroyed a $5,000 suit and the most important night of my career. And it better be a damn good reason." Sophia Reinhardt moved like controlled lightning, her presence filling the small interrogation room until it felt like the walls were closing in. Up close, she was even more formidable than Thomas had realized, her blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass, her posture radiating the kind of power that came from building empires and crushing obstacles. The coffee stain across her suit looked like a wound, dark and spreading, but she wore it like armor, refusing to acknowledge the ruined silk or the faint red mark on her collarbone where the scalding liquid had hit skin. She pulled out the chair Marcus had vacated and sat down across from Thomas, her movements precise, deliberate, the way a chess player approaches a board. For a long moment, she simply studied him, her gaze dissecting every line of his face, every tells in his posture. Reading him the way he imagined, she read quarterly reports and hostile takeover bids. Thomas forced himself to meet her eyes, to not look away, even though every instinct screamed at him to make himself smaller, invisible, the way he'd learned to do in the 3 years since his life had fallen apart. "Marcus tells me you used to be a detective," she said finally, her voice low and measured. "Decorated, even. Commendations for bravery. Then your daughter got sick, and your world collapsed. Now you're serving champagne to people who wouldn't notice if you disappeared tomorrow." The words should have stung, but Thomas was too tired, too hollowed out for pride. "That's about right," he said quietly. Sophia leaned forward, her fingers interlacing on the metal table between them, and her voice dropped even lower, intimate and dangerous. So tell me, Thomas Kane, why a man with nothing left to lose would throw away his last job, his last chance to keep his daughter alive, to save a woman he's never met? Because Marcus showed me the footage. I saw how you moved. That wasn't clumsiness. That was tactical. That was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. Consequences be damned. Thomas felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders, forcing truth up through his throat. There was a man in the press section, he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Fourth row, photographer's credentials, but he wasn't taking pictures. His lens cap was still on. His camera was just a prop. I noticed him during the pre-event setup because he moved wrong, positioned himself wrong. He wasn't there to cover the event. He was there to cover an exit strategy. Sophia's expression didn't change, but Thomas saw her pupils dilate slightly, saw the way her breathing slowed, controlled, the reaction of someone hearing a threat they'd suspected but hoped wasn't real. Go on, she said. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, trying to organize 3 seconds of chaos into something coherent. When they announced your name, when you started walking toward the stage, I saw him shift his weight. His hand moved inside his jacket, not fast, but deliberate, professional. I've seen that movement before, back when I worked homicide. That's not someone reaching for a notepad or adjusting their shirt. That's someone preparing to draw a weapon. Marcus moved closer, his shadow falling across the table. Thomas identified him from our database. Vincent Shaw, does that name mean anything to you? For the first time since entering the room, Sophia's composure cracked. It was just a flicker, a momentary tightening around her eyes, a breath held too long, but Thomas caught it. She knew the name, or at least, she knew why someone would send a man like that. No, she said, but the lie was transparent as glass. Marcus didn't push it. Ms. Reinhardt, if Shaw was contracted for this, it means someone with significant resources wants you dead. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned, funded, professional. We need to move you to a secure location immediately and dash. Sophia cut him off with a sharp gesture. I'm not hiding. I have a company to run, a merger to finalize, investors who are already spooked by tonight's disaster. If I disappear, if I show weakness, everything I've built collapses. She turned back to Thomas, and this time there was something different in her eyes, something calculating and cold. You said you were homicide. That means you know how to investigate, how to read crime scenes, how to think like a killer. Marcus is excellent at protection, but he's not a detective. You are. Thomas felt the trap closing before she even finished speaking. I'm not a detective anymore. I'm a waiter who just assaulted you in front of 200 witnesses. I'm probably going to be arrested the second I walk out of here. Sophia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made boardrooms nervous. Or, she said slowly, you could work for me. Temporarily. Marcus needs someone who understands criminal psychology, who can help track down whoever hired Shaw and figure out why they want me dead. In exchange, I'll make sure the assault charges disappear, and I'll personally ensure your daughter receives the best medical care available. Full coverage. Experimental treatments. Whatever it takes. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the thunder of Thomas's heartbeat in his ears. It was too good to be true, which meant it was a trap, which meant he should walk away, should take his chances with the legal system and hope for mercy. But then he thought of Emma, thought of her small hand in his, thought of the way she smiled when she could breathe without pain, and he knew he'd already made his choice the moment he'd grabbed that coffee pot. What aren't you telling me? He asked quietly. Why does someone want you dead badly enough to hire one of the most expensive assassins in the world? Sophia stood, smoothing down her ruined suit with hands that trembled just slightly, a crack in the armor that she quickly closed. 3 weeks ago, my company announced a merger with Hartmann Pharmaceuticals. It's worth $18 billion and will create the largest medical research conglomerate in the Western Hemisphere. The merger finalizes in 6 days. If I die before then, the deal collapses and a lot of very powerful people lose a lot of money. Or gain it, depending on which side of the table they're sitting. Thomas processed this, his detective's mind automatically building timelines and motive maps. So this could be a competitor trying to kill the deal, or someone inside one of the companies who stands to lose from the merger. That's a lot of suspects. Marcus stepped forward, his expression grim. It's worse than that. 2 months ago, the former CEO of Hartmann Pharmaceuticals, a man named Richard Hartmann, died in a car accident. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses, ruled accidental. His widow inherited everything and immediately agreed to the merger. But if Shaw is involved, if someone is willing to kill Ms. Reinhardt to stop this deal, then maybe Richard Hartmann's accident wasn't so accidental after all. The pieces were clicking together now, forming a picture Thomas didn't like. You think someone is eliminating obstacles to either push through this merger or destroy it, and you don't know which. You don't know who to trust inside your own company. Sophia met his eyes, and for the first time, Thomas saw past the CEO, past the armor, and glimpsed the woman underneath, the one who was terrified but too proud to show it. I have 6 days to figure out who wants me dead and why, 6 days to close the biggest deal of my career, and 6 days to stay alive. Marcus can keep me breathing, but he can't unravel a conspiracy. You can. She extended her hand across the table, an offer and a challenge. So what's it going to be, Detective Kane? Are you going to go home to your dying daughter and explain why you chose pride over her life? Or are you going to help me catch a killer? Thomas stared at her hand, thought of every reason this was insane, thought of every way this could go wrong and cost him more than he had left to lose. Then he thought of Emma's laugh, the sound he hadn't heard in 6 months, the sound he'd do anything, sacrifice anything, to hear again. He reached out and shook Sophia's hand, her grip firm and cold as a contract written in blood. 6 days, he said quietly. But if we're doing this, we do it my way. No corporate lawyers, no PR spin, no protecting reputations. If I find out you're lying to me, if I find out you're playing games while people are dying, I walk, and I take everything I know to the police. Sophia's smile was sharp as broken glass. Deal. Welcome to Reinhardt Industries, Detective. Try not to spill any more coffee. As Marcus began outlining security protocols and Thomas tried to process the fact that his life had just changed again in the span of an hour, none of them noticed the small red light blinking in the corner of the room's air vent, or the encrypted signal transmitting their entire conversation to a server 3,000 miles away, where someone very interested in Sophia Reinhardt's survival was already making new plans. The penthouse suite occupied the entire 42nd floor, a temple of glass and steel that overlooked a city Thomas no longer recognized from this height. He'd been here for 3 hours now, watching Marcus's security team sweep every room with handheld devices and German shepherds trained to smell explosives, while Sophia worked through emails on her laptop, as if assassination attempts were just another item on her daily agenda. Thomas stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his phone pressed to his ear, listening to Emma's night nurse assure him for the 3rd time that his daughter was sleeping peacefully, that the oxygen levels were stable, that everything was fine. But he could hear the question in the nurse's voice, the unspoken concern about why he wasn't home, why he was whispering like a man with secrets. When he finally ended the call, he found Sophia watching him from across the room, her expression unreadable. She'd changed out of the ruined suit into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, the casual clothes somehow making her seem more dangerous, more real, like seeing a tiger outside its cage. "Your daughter," she said, not quite a question. Thomas nodded, pocketing his phone. "Emma. She's 7. Cystic fibrosis. Progressive. The doctors give her maybe 2 years without a transplant, but she's not high enough on the list, and even if she was, we can't afford the anti-rejection medications." The words came out flat, clinical, the way he'd learned to talk about his daughter's death sentence, because if he let emotion in, if he let himself feel it, he'd drown. Sophia closed her laptop with a soft click. "I've already made arrangements. Starting tomorrow, she'll be under the care of Dr. Helena Moss at the Institute for Advanced Pulmonary Medicine. Dr. Moss pioneered a new gene therapy treatment that's showing remarkable results in early trials. It's experimental, which means insurance won't cover it, but I will. All of it." Thomas felt something crack in his chest, something that might have been hope or might have been the last of his defenses shattering. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why would you do that for someone you don't know?" Sophia stood, moving to the bar cart and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She handed him one, and their fingers brushed, a jolt of contact that felt electric. "Because you saved my life tonight without knowing if I deserved it, without asking for anything in return." Because I've spent 15 years in boardrooms surrounded by people who only help when there's profit in it. And you're the first person I've met in a very long time who did the right thing just because it was right. And because if I'm going to trust someone to help me stay alive, I need them invested in that outcome for reasons that go beyond a paycheck. Thomas took a long drink, the whiskey burning down his throat, grounding him. I'm not a bodyguard. I'm not even sure I'm still a detective. I haven't worked a case in 3 years. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his tablet in hand, his expression carved from granite. Then it's time to remember how. We've got a problem. He crossed to the massive dining table that had been converted into a command center, spreading out printed documents and photographs. Thomas and Sophia joined him, and Thomas felt the familiar rush of a case opening up, the puzzle pieces scattering, waiting to be assembled. I pulled everything I could on Richard Hartmann's death, Marcus began, tapping a photo of a twisted luxury sedan wrapped around a concrete barrier. Single vehicle accident on a private mountain road. 3 a.m, no witnesses. Toxicology came back clean, no drugs or alcohol. Mechanical inspection found no evidence of tampering. The official ruling was driver error, excessive speed, possibly fell asleep at the wheel. Thomas studied the photos, his detective's eye-catching details. 3 a.m. on a private road. Where was he coming from? Where was he going? Marcus pulled up another document. That's where it gets interesting. According to his calendar, he had no appointments that night. His security detail had the evening off, which was unusual. His wife, Catherine Hartmann, told investigators he'd gone for a drive to clear his head, that he did that sometimes when he was stressed. Sophia leaned over the table, her shoulder brushing Thomas's. He was stressed because the board was pushing him to resign. Hartmann Pharmaceuticals was hemorrhaging money, bad investments and failed drug trials, and Richard was the face of those failures. The board wanted new leadership, someone who could make the hard decisions to cut losses and pivot the company. Thomas picked up a photo of Richard Hartmann, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, the face of someone who'd built something and watched it crumble. But instead of resigning, he died, and his wife inherited everything. How long after his death did she agree to the merger? Marcus checked his notes. 11 days. The board approached her with the offer, and she accepted immediately. Some people thought it was grief, that she just wanted to be free of the burden. Others thought it was cold calculation, that she knew the company was worth more dead than alive. Thomas's mind was already building timelines, constructing theories. If Richard was murdered, if someone staged it to look like an accident, then they needed him alone, vulnerable, on that road at that specific time. Which means either they lured him there, or someone he trusted asked him to come. Someone who knew he'd go for a drive when he was stressed, someone who knew his security would be off duty. Sophia's expression darkened. Catherine, you think his wife killed him? Thomas turned to face her, seeing the resistance in her eyes, the reluctance to believe that level of betrayal. I think we need to consider every possibility. Who benefited from his death? Follow the money, follow the power. Those are the rules. Marcus pulled up financial records, screens of numbers that made Thomas's head spin. Catherine Hartmann inherited a 42% controlling stake in Hartmann Pharmaceuticals, worth approximately $3.7 billion. The merger agreement stipulates that she'll receive Reinhardt Industries stock worth $6 billion in exchange for her shares, plus a seat on the new board. If the merger completes, she becomes one of the wealthiest women in the world overnight. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Thomas broke it, his voice careful, measured. But if Sophia dies before the merger completes, what happens to the deal? Sophia answered, her voice hollow. The merger agreement has a key person clause. If I die or become incapacitated before the signing, the deal collapses. Hartmann Pharmaceuticals reverts to independent operation, and Catherine keeps her 42% stake in a failing company that'll be worth pennies in 6 months. She loses everything. Thomas absorbed this, the pieces rearranging themselves. So Catherine has every reason to want you alive, which means she's not our killer. Unless there's something else, some other angle we're missing. Marcus nodded grimly. There's always another angle. Hartmann Pharmaceuticals has a board of directors, executives, investors, all of whom have their own agendas. Some wanted the merger, some didn't. Some stood to make fortunes, some stood to lose their positions. And then there's the research. Thomas caught the shift in Marcus's tone, the way his jaw tightened. What research? Sophia moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. 3 years ago, Hartmann Pharmaceuticals began development on a drug called Resurrexin. It was supposed to be revolutionary, a treatment for degenerative neural diseases that could halt progression, maybe even reverse damage. Richard poured everything into it, billions in research and development. It was going to be his legacy, the thing that saved the company. Thomas waited, knowing there was more, knowing it would be bad. Sophia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The clinical trials failed. Catastrophically. 23 patients developed severe complications and 4 died. The FDA shut it down, and Richard was forced to kill the program. But he couldn't let it go. He kept a private research team working on it, off the books, trying to fix whatever went wrong. He was obsessed. Marcus added, "The merger agreement includes full access to all of Hartmann's research archives, including Resurrexin. Reinhardt Industries gets everything, all the data, all the failures, all the secrets. If there's something in those files that someone doesn't want discovered, something worth killing for, then the merger is a threat." Thomas felt the case expanding, becoming something bigger and darker than a simple corporate assassination. "We need to see those files. We need to know what Richard was hiding." Sophia turned from the window, and in the reflection of the city lights, Thomas saw fear naked on her face. "The files are locked in Hartmann's private research facility, a secure location that only Catherine has access to now. If we want them, we'll have to ask her directly. And if she's involved, if she knows we're investigating, we'll be showing our hand." Thomas met her eyes across the room, saw the question there. "Then we don't ask. We take. Tonight." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet, and Thomas saw Sophia's fear transform into something harder, something that reminded him why she'd built an empire. She smiled, cold and sharp. "I knew I hired the right man. Marcus, get us into that facility. Detective Kane, I hope you remember how to break the law, because we're about to commit enough felonies to make tonight's coffee incident look like jaywalking." The research facility sat 30 miles outside the city, a sprawling complex of concrete and reinforced glass that looked more like a fortress than a laboratory. Thomas crouched behind a maintenance shed, the cold night air biting through his borrowed tactical gear, watching the security patterns Marcus had been tracking for the last 40 minutes. 2 guards on rotation, cameras sweeping in predictable arcs, motion sensors on the main entrances, but notably absent on the service corridors that maintenance crews used for late-night equipment deliveries. It was tight security for a pharmaceutical company, but not tight enough for people who knew how to look for weaknesses. Sophia knelt beside him, her breath forming small clouds in the darkness, her earlier boardroom confidence replaced by something raw and focused. She'd insisted on coming despite Marcus's protests, and Thomas had to admit there was something unsettling about watching a billionaire CEO prepare to break into a building like she'd done it before. Marcus materialized from the shadows, silent as smoke, his eyes reflecting the dim security lights. "Guard change in 90 seconds. The loading dock camera has a 30-second delay in its sweep. That's our window." Thomas checked his watch, his pulse steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. This was familiar territory, the careful choreography of an operation, the razor's edge between success and catastrophe. He'd missed this, he realized with a start. Missed the clarity of purpose, the feeling of hunting something that mattered. They moved as one when Marcus gave the signal, 3 shadows crossing open ground in the blind spot between camera sweeps, reaching the loading dock door just as the guard inside turned away to check his phone. Marcus produced a keycard cloned from security footage, and the lock disengaged with a soft click that sounded like thunder in Thomas's ears. Inside, the facility was all sterile corridors and humming fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, and something else, something chemical and wrong that made Thomas's skin crawl. Marcus led them through a maze of hallways, following a route he'd memorized from stolen building schematics, until they reached a heavy security door marked Private Research Archive, authorized personnel only. Sophia stepped forward, producing a small device from her pocket that looked like something from a spy film. "Magnetic encoder," she whispered, seeing Thomas's questioning look. "Corporate espionage isn't just for movies. Sometimes you need to know what your competitors are hiding." The device hummed against the card reader, cycling through encrypted combinations, and after 30 seconds that felt like hours, the door unlocked. The archive room was smaller than Thomas expected, lined floor to ceiling with file servers and climate-controlled storage units, each one labeled with project codes and dates. Sophia moved directly to a terminal in the corner, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Resurrection project files should be on server 7, backed up to physical storage in case of digital corruption. Richard was paranoid about losing data. Thomas and Marcus kept watch at the door while Sophia worked, the only sound the soft clicking of keys and the oppressive hum of the servers. Minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity, until Sophia made a small sound of triumph. Got it. Downloading now. But there's something else here, something Richard flagged in his personal notes. She leaned closer to the screen, her face illuminated by the pale blue glow, and Thomas saw her expression change, saw color drain from her cheeks. "What is it?" he asked, moving to her side. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "The clinical trial failures." Richard documented everything, every complication, every death. But according to these notes, the failures weren't random. The patients who died all received medications from the same production batch, a batch that was manufactured at a facility owned by a subsidiary company. A company that's now part of the merger agreement, a company that I'm about to own. Thomas scanned the screen, his detective's instincts screaming. "What are you saying? That someone deliberately sabotaged the trials?" Sophia pulled up another file, her hands shaking now. Richard suspected it. He hired a private investigator to look into the production facility, to check for contamination or tampering. The investigator's report is here, dated 2 weeks before Richard died. He found evidence of deliberate contamination in the manufacturing process, trace elements of a compound that would interact with Resurrection to create the exact complications that killed those patients. Marcus moved closer, his expression dark. Who owned the subsidiary company before the merger? Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up corporate ownership records, and when the name appeared on screen, the room seemed to tilt. Daniel Kovac. He's the current CFO of Hartmann Pharmaceuticals, and he's been with the company for 20 years. Richard trusted him completely. Thomas felt the pieces clicking into place, the picture becoming clearer and infinitely more dangerous. If Kovac sabotaged the trials, if he deliberately killed those patients, he'd have a reason. What did he gain from Resurrection's failure? Sophia was already pulling up financial records, her breathing quick and shallow. The subsidiary company that manufactured the contaminated batch was sold 6 months after the trials failed, sold to a shell corporation for a fraction of its value. If I trace the ownership, her voice trailed off as she dug deeper into the corporate maze, following money through dummy companies and offshore accounts, until she reached a name that made everything crystallize into horrible clarity. Catherine Hartmann. She owned the Shell Corporation through a trust established before she married Richard. She bought the subsidiary, the one that sabotaged her husband's life's work, and she bought it with money that was hidden from him. The implications crashed over them like a wave. Thomas's mind raced through the timeline, building the conspiracy. Catherine and Kovac worked together. They sabotaged Resurrection to destroy Richard's credibility, to force him out or make him desperate enough to take risks. Then they killed him and staged it as an accident, and Catherine inherited everything. The merger was always the plan, a way to offload a failing company for billions before anyone discovered what they'd done. Marcus's phone buzzed, a sharp sound in the tense silence, and when he checked it, his face went stone cold. "We have a problem. Security just reported an unscheduled visit to the facility. Catherine Hartmann arrived 5 minutes ago with Daniel Kovac. They're heading this way." Sophia yanked the USB drive from the terminal, the download incomplete, but hopefully enough. How did they know we were here? Thomas was already moving toward the door, his mind calculating distances and escape routes. They didn't. They're here for the same reason we are, to destroy the evidence before anyone else can find it. He reached the door and peered into the corridor, saw shadows moving in the distance, heard the echo of footsteps and voices. They were trapped, cut off from their exit route, with the 2 people who'd orchestrated multiple murders closing in. Sophia grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. "There's another way out. The research labs on the East Wing connect to an emergency exit, but we'd have to go through the active testing area. It's not safe. There are experimental compounds, live trials, containment protocols. Thomas met her eyes, saw the fear there, and the determination. Safer than staying here. Move. They ran through corridors that blurred together, Marcus leading with his weapon drawn, Sophia clutching the USB drive like a lifeline, and Thomas bringing up the rear, his borrowed gun feeling foreign and too light in his hand. Behind them, alarms began to wail, red emergency lights strobing, and Thomas knew their presence had been detected, knew that every second counted now. They burst through double doors into a vast laboratory space, rows of containment units and testing chambers stretching into shadows, and the smell hit Thomas like a physical force, chemicals and something organic and rotting that made his eyes water. Sophia grabbed his arm, pointing to glowing warning signs. Biological hazard. Active pathogen research. We need to be careful what we touch. They moved quickly but cautiously through the maze of equipment, heading for the green emergency exit sign, glowing in the distance like salvation, when the lights suddenly cut out. Emergency power kicked in after a heartbeat, bathing everything in dim red light that made the laboratory look like the inside of something dying. A voice echoed through speakers overhead, smooth and cold and familiar. Daniel Kovac. Ms. Reinhardt, I'm disappointed. Breaking and entering, corporate espionage. And here I thought you were a woman who played by the rules. Why don't we talk about this like civilized people? You can keep the files if you want. They won't matter once you're dead. The emergency exit exploded inward, the metal door blown off its hinges by a controlled charge, and Vincent Shaw stepped through the smoke and debris like death in a tailored suit, a suppressed pistol in each hand. His cold eyes found Thomas across the laboratory, and he smiled, an expression devoid of anything human. Hello again, Detective. I have to admit, you've been much more trouble than anticipated. But this time, there's nowhere to run and no coffee pots to save you. Thomas raised his weapon, knowing it was futile, knowing Shaw was a professional who'd killed more people than Thomas had ever arrested. Sophia stood beside him, Marcus moving to shield her, and in that moment suspended between heartbeats, Thomas thought of Emma, thought of her smile, and prayed that saving Sophia's life would somehow, impossibly, be enough to save his daughters. Vincent Shaw's first shot shattered a containment unit 3 feet from Thomas's head, glass exploding in a crystalline spray that rained down like frozen tears. The liquid inside hissed as it hit the floor, eating through the tiles with a sound like screaming, and Thomas realized with cold clarity that Shaw wasn't trying to kill them quickly. He was hurting them, driving them deeper into the laboratory, into a kill box where there would be no escape and no witnesses. Marcus returned fire, his shots precise and controlled, but Shaw moved like water, flowing between cover with the grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime dodging bullets. Thomas grabbed Sophia's arm and pulled her behind a bank of centrifuges, his mind racing through impossible options. They were outgunned, trapped, and surrounded by enough hazardous materials to kill them 10 different ways. The emergency exit was compromised. The main entrance was certainly locked down by now, and somewhere in this building, Catherine Hartmann and Daniel Kovac were waiting to clean up whatever mess Shaw left behind. Sophia's hand found his in the darkness, her grip surprisingly steady. The ventilation system, she whispered, her lips close to his ear. The labs are connected to a central air filtration shaft, oversized because they need to be able to evacuate contaminated air quickly in case of a breach. If we can reach the maintenance access on the north wall, we might be able to climb out. Thomas looked at her, saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the same mind that had built a billion-dollar empire, now calculating angles of survival. That's insane. Those shafts could be filled with God knows what kind of toxins. Another shot ricocheted off metal somewhere to their left, followed by the sharp crack of Marcus's return fire. Sophia's smile was grim, more or less insane than staying here. She had a point. Thomas nodded to Marcus, used hand signals from his police days to communicate the plan, and saw the security chief's brief nod of understanding. Marcus would provide cover, draw Shaw's attention, while they made for the ventilation access. It was a terrible plan, the kind that got people killed, but it was the only plan they had. On Marcus's signal, they moved. The world became a chaos of sound and violence, muzzle flashes strobing in the red emergency light, bullets sparking off equipment, and somewhere in the maelstrom, Thomas heard Shaw laugh, a sound like breaking bones. They reached the north wall, and Sophia's hands found the access panel, her fingers working the emergency release. The metal grate fell away, revealing a dark shaft that disappeared upward into darkness, and Thomas boosted her up first, feeling her weight leave his hands as she grabbed the ladder rungs inside. He was halfway through when he heard Marcus cry out, a sharp sound of pain that made Thomas's blood freeze. He turned, saw Marcus down on one knee, blood spreading across his shoulder, saw Shaw advancing with the calm patience of a predator who knew the hunt was over. Thomas made a decision that would haunt him. He dropped back down, raised his weapon, and fired every round he had at Shaw, not aiming for center mass, but for the containment units around him, for the glass chambers and sealed containers labeled with biohazard warnings. The laboratory became a hurricane of breaking glass and spilling chemicals, liquids mixing in ways they were never meant to mix, and Shaw's expression changed for the first time, changed from cold amusement to genuine alarm as he realized what Thomas had done. Alarms screamed, a different pitch now, the automated system detecting a catastrophic containment breach. Steel shutters began to drop, emergency protocols activating to seal the laboratory and prevent whatever was now mixing on the floor from spreading to the rest of the facility. Shaw ran for the emergency exit, his professional calm finally breaking, but the shutters were faster. They slammed down with the finality of a guillotine, and Shaw's scream was cut off as he threw himself through the narrowing gap, his jacket catching, tearing, and then he was gone, and they were sealed in with the rising chemical fog. Thomas grabbed Marcus, hauled him to his feet, and together they scrambled into the ventilation shaft, pulling the grate closed behind them just as the fog reached them, tendrils of vapor that smelled like burning metal and rotten fruit curling through the air. They climbed in darkness, broken only by Sophia's phone light above them. Marcus's breathing labored but steady, his training overriding the pain. The shaft seemed endless, their hands slipping on the metal rungs, their lungs burning with exertion and the thin wisps of contaminated air that followed them upward. Thomas didn't know how long they climbed. Minutes or hours, time lost meaning in the suffocating metal tunnel, until finally Sophia kicked out another grate and cold night air rushed in like salvation. They emerged onto the roof of the facility, collapsing onto the gravel surface, gasping like drowning victims breaking the surface. Below them, the building was in chaos, security swarming, emergency vehicles arriving with flashing lights that painted the night in blue and red. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he answered it with a grimace, listened for a moment, then looked at Thomas and Sophia with something like relief in his eyes. That was my contact in the police department. Vincent Shaw was found dead in the East Corridor, overcome by chemical exposure before he could escape. Catherine Hartmann and Daniel Kovac were arrested trying to flee the facility. The USB drive's contents were automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server the moment we plugged it in. Everything, all of Richard's research, all the evidence of the sabotage, it's already in the hands of federal investigators. Sophia started laughing, a sound that was half hysteria and half genuine amusement. You set up a dead man's switch. You brilliant, paranoid woman. Marcus's smile was pained but genuine. I learned from the best. Now can we please get off this roof before someone starts shooting at us again? They made their way down through a maintenance stairwell, emerging into the parking lot where a dozen police cars and ambulances were staging. A detective Thomas vaguely recognized from his old precinct did a double take when he saw them, covered in grime and chemicals, bleeding and exhausted. Kane? Thomas Kane, what the hell are you doing here? Thomas opened his mouth to answer, to try to explain the impossible series of events that had led him from a ballroom to a rooftop, but Sophia stepped forward, her CEO persona snapping back in a place like armor. Detective Kane is a private security consultant working for Reinhardt Industries. He and his team uncovered evidence of corporate espionage and murder, evidence that I believe will be of great interest to your investigation into the deaths of Richard Hartmann and 4 clinical trial patients. I'll have my lawyers contact you in the morning with full statements and cooperation. The detective looked between them, clearly sensing there was a much larger story he wasn't getting, but Sophia's tone brooked no argument. For now, Detective Kane needs to get home to his daughter. I trust that won't be a problem. The detective sighed, recognizing the weight of money and power when it stood in front of him. Get out of here, Kane, but I want you in my office first thing Monday morning. Full statement, no corporate lawyer bullshit. Thomas nodded, too exhausted to argue, and let Sophia guide him toward a black SUV that Marcus had somehow summoned. They drove in silence through the pre-dawn darkness, the city slowly waking around them, until Sophia's driver pulled up in front of Thomas's apartment building, a crumbling structure in a neighborhood that gentrification had forgotten. Sophia walked him to the door, and in the gray morning light, Thomas saw her clearly for the first time since this had all begun. She looked human, vulnerable, the mask of power stripped away by exhaustion and near death. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the coffee, for tonight, for not walking away when any sane person would have." Thomas managed a tired smile. "Thank a waiter who couldn't afford to lose another job. I'm just glad Emma will get her treatment." Sophia reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope, pressed it into his hands. "Dr. Moss is expecting you and Emma this afternoon. Everything's arranged. And there's something else in there, a contract if you want it. Head of corporate security for the merged company, full benefits, salary that will let you stop working 3 jobs. No pressure, no obligation, but the offer stands." Thomas looked at the envelope, felt the weight of it, the weight of a life he'd thought was lost forever being handed back to him. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. Sophia nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Thomas, that thing you said about doing the right thing just because it's right? I've been thinking about that. About what my company could be if profit wasn't the only measure of success. Richard Hartman wanted to build something that healed people. Maybe it's time I honored that." She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "So thank you for reminding me what that looks like." She walked back to the SUV, and Thomas watched her drive away, watched the sun rising over a city that looked different now, full of possibility instead of just obstacles. Inside his apartment, Emma was awake, her small face lighting up when she saw him. "Daddy, you're home. The nurse said you had to work late, but I drew you a picture." She held up a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings, a stick figure man, and a little girl under a bright yellow sun, and Thomas felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. He gathered her in his arms, careful of the oxygen tube, and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. "I have a surprise for you, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "We're going to see a special doctor today, someone who's going to help you feel better, someone who's going to help you breathe easier." Emma pulled back, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "Really? Like really, really?" Thomas nodded, tears he didn't bother hiding streaming down his face. "Really, really. And you know what else? I think things are going to be different now. Better. I think we're going to be okay." 3 months later, Thomas stood in his new office on the 35th floor of Reinhardt Tower, watching the city sprawl below him like a living map. Emma's gene therapy was working beyond anyone's expectations, her lung function improving week by week, the blue tinge fading from her lips as her body slowly healed. Catherine Hartman and Daniel Kovac were both awaiting trial, their conspiracy unraveling under federal investigation, revealing a web of corruption that had claimed lives and destroyed families. Vincent Shaw's death had closed the file on 6 unsolved assassinations, bringing peace to families who'd thought justice would never come. The merger had completed, creating the medical research giant Sophia had envisioned, but with a new mission statement, one that prioritized patient care over profit margins, that funded research into rare diseases, that honored Richard Hartman's original vision. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Board meeting in 10. Try not to spill anything." Thomas smiled, pocketed his phone, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the polished steel, saw a man who looked different from the exhausted waiter who'd grabbed a coffee pot and changed his life. He looked like someone who'd found his way back from the edge, who'd discovered that sometimes the right choice, the impossible choice, was the only choice that mattered. In the conference room, Sophia was already holding court, her presence commanding the space as she outlined expansion plans and research initiatives. When Thomas entered, she caught his eye and smiled, a private acknowledgement of everything they'd survived, everything they'd built from the ashes of that chaotic night. After the meeting, as executives filed out and assistants gathered papers, Sophia walked over to the window where Thomas stood. "Emma's recital is tomorrow, right? The one where she's singing that song from the musical." Thomas looked at her, surprised she remembered. "Yeah, she's been practicing for weeks. First time she's had enough breath to sing a whole song without stopping." Sophia nodded, her expression soft. "I'd like to come. If that's okay. I'd like to hear her sing." Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest, the kind that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with connection, with the strange, impossible bond forged in crisis and sealed in survival. "She'd like that. She still talks about the queen in the castle. Says you're her hero." Sophia laughed, a sound that had become more common in recent months, more genuine. "I think we both know who the real hero is. A man who risked everything, who spilled coffee on a CEO and changed 2 lives forever." She turned to face him fully, her blue eyes clear and direct. "Thank you, Thomas. For that night, for this, for reminding me what matters." Thomas smiled, thinking of Emma's laugh, of a life rebuilt from ruins, of second chances that shouldn't exist but somehow did. "Thank you for giving me a reason to grab that coffee pot. For giving me something worth fighting for." They stood together in the silence of the empty boardroom. 2 people who'd been strangers 3 months ago, who'd been thrown together by violence and conspiracy, who'd built something neither of them had expected from the wreckage. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, and somewhere in that vast sprawl, a 7-year-old girl was practicing her song, her lungs full of air, her future bright with possibility. And it had all started with coffee, with chaos, with a single desperate choice made in the space between heartbeats. Sometimes, Thomas thought, that's all it takes to change everything. One moment of courage, one impossible decision, and a whole world shifts on its axis. He wouldn't have it any other way.